During a mandatory safety meeting, my team lead joked loudly, "If she's the best we've got, we're doomed anyway, might as well light a match now." The room laughed uncomfortably as he grinned, "Just kidding." Mostly. I quietly submitted every safety violation I had seen over 6 months. When OSHA showed up unannounced, watching his face fall was better than any bonus I ever received. I work at a metal fabrication plant just outside of Dayton, Ohio. I'd been there 5 years, and during most of that time, I kept my head down and just did my job. Not because I was afraid, but because it's how I was raised. You show up, you work hard, you don't make waves. That's what my dad used to say before he passed. I believed in that for a long time. Until I met Mitch. Mitch wasn't always our team lead. When I first started, he was just another guy on the floor. A loudmouth, yeah, but not in charge. But a couple years ago, after the previous lead retired, management decided Mitch was motivated and confident. What they really meant was he kissed up better than the rest of us. Once he got that clipboard and authority, he changed. Fast. He liked to talk down to people, especially me. I don't know if it was because I'm quiet or because I'm one of the few women in the shop. Maybe both. At first it was little stuff. Sarcastic comments when I double-checked measurements. Passive-aggressive compliments like, "Wow, you actually got that weld clean." Then he started saying things in front of others. "You know, we didn't have all these mistakes before HR started filling quotas. I don't care what the book says, if she wants to play with fire, she better not cry when she gets burned." The other guys either laughed or stayed quiet. I knew some of them didn't agree with him. 1 or 2 apologized quietly when we were alone. But no one stood up to him. Mitch made everyone nervous, not just me. He had a way of acting like the boss even when the real manager was around. But the worst moment? That happened during our quarterly safety meeting. We were all packed into the break room. Old folding tables, squeaky plastic chairs, cheap donuts in a box. The plant manager was going through the motions, reading the same reminders we always got: eye protection, ear plugs, proper lifting posture, yada yada. Most people weren't listening. Mitch sure wasn't. When the manager mentioned how safety is everyone's responsibility, Mitch leaned back in his chair, loud as ever, and said, "Well, if she's the best we've got, we're doomed anyway, might as well light a match now." People chuckled nervously. Some looked down. No one looked at me. Then he smirked and added, "Just kidding, mostly." My stomach dropped. It wasn't just the words, it was the silence afterward. That quiet kind of agreement. The kind that says, "You're on your own." That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't vent to anyone. I went home, sat down at my old desk, and opened a folder I'd been keeping on my personal laptop for months. I called it Unreported. Inside were photos, notes, and timestamps of all the safety issues I'd seen and kept track of. Some people knit. Some people go fishing. I collect evidence. Broken lockout tags. Welding gas tanks stored near open flames. Forklifts driven by guys who hadn't passed their certs. People working 12-hour shifts with no breaks. Even one guy who got a minor burn and was told to just ice it at home and don't file anything. I had it all. I started typing the complaint. OSHA's website let you file anonymously, but I attached everything. Dozens of images. Video clips from my phone. Dates, names, times. And I explained what it was like working under Mitch. How he ignored the rules and mocked people who cared about safety. I didn't add drama. I just told the truth. When I hit submit, my hands were steady. I didn't know if anything would come of it. Honestly, I didn't expect much. But it felt like the only thing I could do. 6 weeks later, they showed up. It was a Tuesday, mid-morning. 2 inspectors in plain clothes walked in during second shift. No warning. They asked to see the plant manager, and within 15 minutes, they were walking the floor. Everyone was confused at first. Then panicked. Mitch tried to act calm. He walked over, smiling like a used car salesman. "Hey there, fellas. You need a tour?" They didn't smile back. They asked for records. Incident reports. Certifications. Safety logs. They started opening cabinets, checking equipment, pointing at hazards. One of them asked why a press machine had an old out-of-service tag on it while it was running. Another asked about respirators and how often the filters were replaced. Mitch started sweating. I've never seen him stutter before that day. And me? I just kept working. Quiet. Focused. Watching out of the corner of my eye as the world tilted just a little bit. It was just the beginning. The OSHA inspectors stayed for hours. They didn't just do a walkthrough and leave, they dug deep. They asked to speak with operators one by one. I was called in about 2 hours after they arrived. One of the inspectors, a woman named Shelley, closed the office door behind us and said, "We've received a pretty detailed complaint. We're just trying to confirm what's real." I didn't lie. I didn't have to. I told her everything I'd seen. I didn't even mention Mitch's comments during the safety meeting. That wasn't the point. This was about how dangerous the shop had become and how no one wanted to say anything because they were scared they'd get written up, or worse, fired. She nodded a lot. Took notes. Asked sharp questions. When I walked back onto the floor, Mitch was pacing around like a caged dog. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. He knew. By the end of the day, the inspectors handed the plant manager a preliminary citation sheet. They didn't give details, but the look on his face was enough. He didn't say a word as he posted a temporary notice near the breakroom bulletin board, like the law required. That night, the group chat I was in with a few coworkers lit up. Everyone was buzzing. Some were nervous, some were angry, and a couple were quietly excited. Nobody said it out loud, but I could tell people were relieved. For the first time, someone had actually done something. Mitch didn't show up the next day. Rumor was, he got pulled into a closed-door meeting with HR and was told to take a few days while they investigated. Another rumor was that OSHA had already found enough violations to slap the company with a serious fine. No one knew what was true. But something had changed. You could feel it. 3 days later, the plant held an all-hands meeting. The plant manager, a quiet guy named Reed, looked more stressed than I'd ever seen him. He told us that due to ongoing compliance concerns, the company would be bringing in an outside safety consultant for a full audit, and that policies would be strictly enforced going forward. He said it like it was a good thing. Like they were just tightening up. But then he said something that made the room fall silent. Also, we want to remind everyone that retaliation against coworkers who bring forward safety concerns will not be tolerated. That was the first time anyone said it out loud. The room stayed quiet, but I felt eyes on me. I didn't flinch. Mitch came back the following Monday. But something was different. He didn't yell. He didn't make any jokes. He didn't speak unless someone asked him something directly. And even then, his answers were short. A few people whispered that he'd been demoted but was being kept on so the company didn't look worse to OSHA. Whatever the truth was, he walked around like a balloon that had lost all its air. Then came the twist I didn't expect. That Thursday, right after lunch, I got called into the HR office. I sat down across from a woman I barely knew, Meredith, I think her name was. She smiled like she was trying too hard. Said she wanted to touch base about the inspection and make sure I felt safe and heard. Then she slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a form. A voluntary transfer offer. Different department. Less dirty, less physical. Same pay. I stared at it. "You're not in trouble," she said quickly, like she'd practiced. "This is just a chance for a fresh start. Away from the floor. No pressure." It hit me like a slap. They weren't firing me. They weren't blaming me. But they wanted me moved, away from Mitch, away from the shop floor, away from the eyes I'd opened. I picked up the form. Read it over. Then I folded it neatly and slid it back to her. "No, thank you," I said. Her smile didn't change, but her eyes narrowed just a little. I went back to work like nothing happened. But I knew now, the fight wasn't over. A week passed after I turned down the transfer. Everything on the surface seemed calm, but underneath, things were shifting. I could feel it. The air on the floor was different. Heavier. People whispered more. Conversation stopped when I walked by. Mitch wouldn't even look at me. But it didn't stay quiet for long. 2 Fridays later, I was halfway through my shift when I noticed my time card was missing from the punch rack. At first, I thought maybe it had fallen or gotten stuck. I asked one of the floor clerks, and she just looked confused. "Maybe it's in the office," she said, clearly trying to avoid my eyes. It wasn't in the office. I asked HR. They told me, flatly, that it had been pulled for review. No details. That night, my paycheck came up short. 1 hour short. Not a lot. Just enough to make me question whether it was a mistake or a message. I documented everything. I had already learned my lesson: keep receipts. Monday morning, I brought it up with Meredith in HR. "Oh, that's probably just an input error," she said, flipping through her files without even pretending to care. "We'll fix it next cycle." I nodded, smiled, and left. Then I added it to my file, along with another entry from that same week. A coworker I trusted told me someone in the office had asked him if I was always that uptight about safety. Then the real twist came. Late one afternoon, the OSHA inspector, Shelley, came back for a follow-up. She walked through again, asked more questions. This time she brought a younger guy with her. They stayed longer. They didn't just ask about machines or gear. They asked about management behavior. That's when I realized someone else had reported retaliation. And it wasn't me. Later that day, a guy named Keith, mid-40s, works in the press section, caught me by the lockers. He leaned in and said, "Hey." I told them what they needed to know. "What they're doing to you is wrong. Just so you know, you're not alone in this." He walked off before I could say anything. But I stood there a minute, gripping my locker door, feeling something I hadn't in weeks. Not fear. Strength. They tried to silence me. They tried to isolate me. And now other people were stepping forward. Over the next 2 weeks, it became obvious that something big was happening behind closed doors. HR started holding one-on-one policy refresher meetings. Managers looked tense. Mitch was nowhere to be seen for almost a week, and when he returned, he was no longer listed as team lead on the schedule board. The best part? The company announced a new role, Safety Compliance Coordinator. A full-time position, separate from management. A liaison between the floor and the higher-ups. They offered it to me. No pressure. No speech. Just a printed offer left in my locker with a note: "We believe you'd be the right person." I didn't take it right away. Because by then, I'd learned, every decision has weight. Every action leaves a mark. And I wasn't done watching them sweat. I didn't take the safety job right away. I needed to see what they were really offering. Was it a real position with real authority, or just a way to get me off the floor and out of the way? So I waited. 2 more weeks passed, and in that time, things started to shift even harder. Mitch's name disappeared from every work order. Nobody said where he went, but a friend in dispatch let it slip that Mitch had been suspended while OSHA reviewed his conduct and oversight history. Translation: they were digging through everything he'd touched. Then, one night, Keith, same guy who stood up for me, was sent home early for insubordination. His shift lead said he had refused to follow instructions, But Keith said all he did was ask why they were being told to skip a lockout-tagout procedure during machine cleaning. That was the last straw. I contacted OSHA again, this time openly. I gave them updated logs. I shared the story about Keith. I forwarded screenshots of texts from coworkers showing pressure from supervisors to ignore new safety policies that were slowing down production. One message even said, "Don't let that girl turn you into a snitch." That was the moment I knew, they never really learned. They were just hiding better. And that's when OSHA came back, with lawyers. They weren't just doing inspections now. They were preparing to fine the company for retaliation. They subpoenaed documents. They demanded interviews. It turned into a full-blown case. The plant manager, Reed, got reassigned to a desk job at headquarters. Meredith from HR? She quietly left the company. People said she'd decided to move out of state. Sure she did. And Mitch? They fired him. Not a suspension. Not a transfer. A full-on termination for cause. His file, I later heard, was thick with complaints that HR had buried. But once OSHA started digging, those complaints didn't stay buried. A week after his firing, I saw him sitting in the parking lot in his truck. Just sitting there, staring at the building. He didn't get out. He didn't say anything. But I saw him through the break room window. I went outside and walked straight to my car, right past him. Didn't look at him. Didn't flinch. Let him sit in his silence. That same week, I accepted the safety compliance coordinator job. But I made one thing clear before I signed: if they wanted me to take the role, they had to give me real authority. I wanted a direct reporting line to corporate safety, not local management. I wanted protection for workers who reported violations. And I wanted mandatory training, led by OSHA-approved instructors. They agreed. I took the job. The first thing I did? I walked the floor and spoke to every worker, one by one. I told them exactly what their rights were. I gave out my cell number. I told them that if something felt wrong, they could call me. No forms, no waiting. Just call. Some people were still nervous. Some weren't sure. But slowly, they started trusting it. Keith came back. He got his lost pay restored and a formal apology from HR, on paper. The shop changed. Not overnight. Not easily. But it changed. As for me? I wasn't trying to be a hero. I wasn't out for blood. But I wasn't going to let them crush people like me ever again. And Mitch? Last I heard, he tried to get a job at another shop in Columbus. Word must have followed him, because it didn't last long. Seems like people don't want a guy with a big mouth and a bigger ego when OSHA's got his name in a file. I don't feel sorry for him. He lit the match. I just handed over the fire report.